Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour or so then, we'll see what's making the headlines with the communications advisor, former aide to Boris Johnson, Guto Harri, and the journalist and podcaster, Lesley Riddoch. Great to see you both. To the front pages before we get your thoughts. The Eye then has word that 60 million doses of the Novavax COVID jab will be manufactured in the UK, easing concerns about possible problems with imports from the EU. The Daily Mail seems to think the government aren't moving back to normality quickly enough, asking what are we waiting for? While the Times leads on reassurance from the Prime Minister that the plan to ease lockdown remains on course for shops and pubs to reopen in 2 weeks' time. The Telegraph carries a joint suggestion from the leaders of Britain, France and Germany that there should be a global treaty to prevent and protect against future pandemics. The Metro has the headline 9 minutes 29 seconds, reflecting the amount of time its alleged police officer Derek Chauvin spent with his knee on George Floyd's neck. Mr Chauvin's trial began today in the US. The Guardian hears there are calls for a wide-ranging investigation into sexual abuse in schools by the regulator Ofsted after a website for survivors was inundated with thousands of allegations. The Daily Mirror again leading with details of the alleged relationship between Boris Johnson and the American businesswoman Jennifer Arcuri. The Financial Times offers warnings of large expected losses from the investment banks Nomura and Credit Suisse. So, Guto Harri and Lesley Riddoch here. Different headlines, has to be said, but you've picked to start with the Daily Telegraph, which is really interesting, isn't it, Guto? World leaders calling for a pandemic treaty, saying this is the biggest challenge to face the world since the 1940s and needs to be dealt with thus.
Yes, it's a refreshing story for so many reasons, because there seems to be cooperation on the story itself across newspapers, across countries and all that. But it really is a sign of great maturity, I think, that we're behaving not in a sort of selfish, short-term and rather unseemly fashion, grabbing as much of a vaccine as we can and depriving everyone else of it. There does seem to be a move among the key players in the world to make sure that the entire world is inoculated and that we have some sort of code of conduct, if you like, at a global scale, be called something much grander than that going forwards. And in the end, of course, it goes back to a core moral principle that what actually does benefit each of us individually in the end is what benefits the whole. And to see that happen on an international global level, potentially, is extremely exciting.
Yes, and the Daily Telegraph, Lesley, pointing out that this joint article comes in the wake of disagreement between Britain and the EU over the production and distribution of vaccines. That is one element, but transparency is also one of the words they call for, which goes back to the origins, I guess, of this and whether we will ever find out how this coronavirus began in Wuhan and spread around the world.
Yes, but it looks like the initiative is really the World Health Organizations and the other leaders have decided to fall in behind it. I mean, it is really quite extraordinary because the rest of the stories that we'll probably spend some time talking about are entirely about, if you like, vaccine slightly one-upmanship or at least the concern that we've got enough to go round. And the key thing that they're looking at here, these 24 world leaders, is to bring countries together, dispel the temptations of isolationism in the wake of a pandemic. And they're drawing all sorts of comparisons with the period after the Second World War. I mean, you could, if you want, if you've got 24 leaders in a room and they're beginning to be able to think like that, there's a lot more in terms of reconstruction and a green reconstruction that you could start thinking about beyond the aims of the vaccine, important in the short term though they be.
Yes, you make a very good point, going back to domestic vaccine supply. The Telegraph saying last night, which is today obviously, Mr Johnson announced his latest move to ensure the resilience of the UK's domestic vaccine supply chains amid the threat of trade wars, which takes us to the Eye, Guto, UK vaccines boost. So this is the bottling of the Novavax doses will now take place in Britain instead of the European Union. They've clearly been working hard behind the scenes.
Yes, very hard to get it sort of over here so that there's no question of any blockade getting in the way, whether that's politically motivated or just the result of, confusion at the border. There's a nice little twist to it that the the production is going to be of all places, Bernard Castle, somewhere that some people in parts of England will know well as a beauty spot. The rest of us know of it as the place where a certain Dominic Cummings went for a walk or to test his eyesight or whatever. But a happier association, if you like, for that part of the north of England, that it's going to make us more resilient and make sure that we can carry on going, what they say in Number 10 is sort of gangbusters on vaccinating people.
Absolutely. Data not dates, as we all know, and we hang on to every date, clearly, don't we? The Daily Mail asking, what are we waiting for? As the infection figures come down, it is the mortality that's really coming down, isn't it? Which is what we're told was going to come first with the vaccines working so effectively. But Lesley, what do you think about Daily Mail running a piece like this, trying to urge the roadmap to be speeded up?
Well, of course, this is the point where I have to point out that I'm speaking to you from Scotland and our point is totally different. So we don't get any of this sort of unlocking down really till April the 26th. And in many respects, it feels like we're just a little behind the kind of exuberance thing and sometimes the optimism that then gets followed by having to kind of pull back the horns. So the outlook in Scotland's generally been a lot more cautious, and yet clearly there's been a bit of survey work done that suggests that most people in any part of Britain are about one step ahead of whatever regulation they're supposed to be abiding by at the moment. So the restrictions are already being stretched to what we're about probably to be able to enjoy officially. So I can see that there's a head of steam developing. Maybe this is just my inherent cautious Scot, but I'm just still canny. I'm quite happy to just let this run a little bit longer and keep the phasing going on that we've got north of the border so that we don't have everybody effectively unlocking at the same time.
Yes, that's interesting. Although the phasing still does exist south of the border, does it not, Guto? As we heard from the Chief Medical Officer, Scientific Advisor and the Prime Minister today, caution is still the watchword. And the problem is that those who are most likely to get and pass on the virus are those who are not vaccinated.
Yeah, and I don't blame the Prime Minister or the government, certainly in England, for being cautious, but neither do I blame the press and some of us who are less cautious in our nature, perhaps, of being a little impatient, straining at the leash at the moment. My fear is that we have vaccinated 30 million people. Deaths have fallen to a tiny fraction of what they were, and yet very little so far has changed in the big calculations and in the behaviour. And it's a little bit like that wonderful scene with Morgan Freeman in Shawshank Redemption, where the prisoner is told that he can leave prison and he doesn't want to. He's got so used to being incarcerated. And that's the danger with the UK now, is that people, are free and soon will be free. And the government has more room for manoeuvre now than it's had for a while, but it's still overcautious. So I see both sides of the argument, but instinctively I'm with those who want to go further and faster.
Yes, what I'm surprised about is that they don't stress that we're all dealing with this Kent variant, the B117, with its extra transmissibility and presumed mortality, which is a main factor, I think, for the slowness of the roadmap. But what many people will be discussing today is that new briefing room. Cost a penny, as we know. Daily Telegraph has a picture of it. So your assessment then, what did you think? Did it look better? Did it make the government look more efficient and presentable? Did they look comfortable? Lesley, you first.
Well, they've cut the union flags down from 4 to 2, so it's a little bit less completely overwhelming for those of us who are just a bit finding it a bit odd to have the Union Jack absolutely everywhere. I think there's been a bit of a change in the front. There was some lettering which apparently was slightly scrambled and has been replaced by a logo. But apart from that, how you can find £2.6 million worth of investment in that room totally beats me, as I'm sure it does most people.
Guto, this is your home area, is it not? As a communications advisor, what do you reckon?
Well, you're always going to get clobbered for spending more than the price of this and most houses on one room with a few flags in it. But in the end, it's the technology in that room that is critical. And having laboured as a journalist in Number 10 for years with nowhere to go, to the toilet, literally, holding things together, sometimes by string or certainly gaffer tape. It's about time that we have a proper press centre at the heart of government here, where you can broadcast live to the world and things are more seamless. And I'm sure over time, those people who struggle with the technical side of bringing all the news to us will inform the rest of us how much easier this has made life. And we may think that £2 million was quite well spent in that sense, because it enables our leaders to be accountable, and that matters.
OK, and we will await, obviously, the press briefings after the May elections, no doubt. We will hear more from you in just a moment. Still to come, allegations of endemic sexual abuse in schools. We will talk about more about that in just a moment. You're watching the press preview with me now, Lesley Riddoch and Guto Harri. Welcome back. Oh, I was going to say welcome back. Oh, there you are. Lovely. You disappeared for a moment. So let's take a look, shall we, Lesley, at The Guardian, which is calls for an urgent inquiry now into serial school sexual abuse after the numbers of pupils who had listed concerns has gone up exponentially, hasn't it?
Yes, and I think this is fascinating, because to any of us of a certain age, this is like a rerun of Childline's establishment all those years ago by Esther Ranson, which, again, at the time, nobody took this seriously. And it took a real campaigning journalist to spend the rest of her life actually campaigning on just this issue. Here's this young woman, Soma Sarah, who set up this website, Everyone's Invited, after her own experiences of what she called a rape culture. I think she's in her early 20s. And she was inundated on social media with other people's experiences of the same thing. She decided to move to this website and has got something like 5,000 accounts on it now from children. Some of the girls are as young as 9. And they're talking about, in fact, there's been a walkout, I see, from a school in London, where the pupils have said they're just sick of the kind of sexual intimidation that's going on. And of course, now there's bigger discussions too, because boys are feeling a bit targeted as well. This is generally one-way traffic, but some of the schools that have been looked at, and some of these elite boarding schools have been in the focus too. Gordon's is one. Prince Charles famously said of it, it was cold that's in kilts. So there's lots of boys have felt extremely constrained in the sort of atmosphere of some schools as well, and this has got to be taken seriously.
Yes, well, we obviously don't have the schools on to defend themselves, but certainly The Guardian says as they move forward with this after the Everyone's Invited idea, which was set up, that a special national helpline is expected to be set up this week, that Ofsted should investigate as part of a deep dive inquiry. So no doubt we'll hear more about that in the coming days. But with our time left, do you mind if we move on, Guto, to the ship? Just what extraordinary pictures these are in the Metro. Finally, the Ever Given freed after a monumental effort.
Yes, I've loved the whole story of this ship. I've been slightly, obsessed with it. The idea that a ship, the size of 4 football fields or longer than the Shard in London is tall, and the Shard is Europe's tallest building, can actually just somehow jam this huge artery through which a massive proportion of world trade flows and cause carnage, change the price of oil, change, patterns of behavior across the world. It's been fascinating. There's a real sense of triumph, and well done to those engineers who somehow have managed to dug this monster out of whatever sandbank it was stuck in. But it's going to have repercussions for the way companies do business. There's been interesting things over the last few days about how supply chains will change and how we will buy from different places, we'll hold on to more goods. All of it because one great big ship with a captain who's going to be mortified and infamous for the rest of his life actually managed to block the entire canal. Yeah, you get Ever Given, you get the pandemic, you get Brexit. It's all a changing, is it not, in the way we do business. Lovely to have you both on. Lesley, Guto, we will see you for more at 11:30. Thank you.